A letter to Prime Minister Gillard. There will come a time when humanity will look upon this point in history and be ashamed. Furthermore, it will ask, why? What was the issue? What was it we were fighting against? Oh no, wait. That time is now. There are two questions which reside at the heart of this matter. What is marriage and what is homosexuality? Both are equally important and both are commonly misconstrued. Allow me to address them. To understand what marriage is, we need first understand its origins. Marriage predates recorded history and therefore outdates the institution of religion as practiced today. The concept of marriage has become entangled with its religious connotations. But if it predates religion, then what was the purpose of it? There are several options one can select from here. Number 1. Marriage allowed a man rights to sexual encounters with a woman that improved his chances of being the paternal genetic donor to her offspring. 2. Marriage gave a man ownership over any holdings that the woman may possess. 3. Marriage gave a man control of a woman's labor, her workings within their household. 4. Marriage, particularly arranged marriages, created a relationship, a partnership between two houses or families. And 5. Marriage was later deemed to be necessary for the procreation of children that could be respected within the community. This was mostly to reduce contests of wills. As you can see, none of these purposes of marriage was for love between the man and the woman involved. Indeed, as arranged marriages were the norm for a large portion of human history, love had nothing to do with marriage. Instead, marriage was more like a business contract. But as religion became more and more important, and therefore more meddlesome in our lives, the various churches found it necessary to deem marriage a religious experience. Marriage became something that set humans apart from the animals. And as black people were deemed nothing more than animals, without rights, they were banned from getting married. This changed. All rights within marriage were a man's, not a woman's. This also changed. Marriage has not known equal footing between partners until quite recently. Indeed, even in Australia, spousal abuse was quite common and accepted until the last few decades, because it was a husband's right. I could go on. Rape, interracial couples, all were defined, limited, or acceptable because of the concept of what marriage meant. What we used to accept as justifiable in marriage we no longer do. Indeed, if marriage is for the procreation of children, why are there married couples in the world choosing not to have children? Should they have to announce their plans for not having children before entering into the state of matrimony, only so it can be denied them? And in today's world, many people have children outside of matrimony. Illegitimacy is no longer the curse it once was. Marriage, the ideal of it, what it pertains to, who can enter into it, it's evolving. The second question I posed is, what is homosexuality? We all can understand that homosexuality is the state of sexuality where a person is sexually attracted to and aroused by a member of their own sex. They may or may not engage in acts of sexual intimacy. Much is also done and not done by heterosexuals. One of the greatest arguments against homosexuality is the unnaturalness of it. But if this was the case, it would A. not occur in great numbers, and B. not occur in other species. Therefore, I need to address these two hypotheses. First, homosexuality does not occur in great numbers. There have been many studies trying to determine the proportion of humans engaging in homosexual activities. But with the stigma still attached to homosexuality, many people may not be admitting to it, so all data needs to be considered carefully. Even with this in mind, studies have found between 2 and 13% of people in the Western world are homosexual. Should we take the lowest value at 2% of the human population as being homosexual, that still leaves us with 138,600,000 people. There are more homosexuals in the world than there are people in Australia. Further, 20% of people studied have had at least thoughts of a sexual nature, about a person of the same sex. Point 2. Homosexuality does not occur in other species. In 1999, 1,500 non-human animal species were known to engage in acts of homosexuality. In some species, these acts may be transitory, such as when used for learning purposes to improve sexual skills, or when the numbers of one sex outweigh the other. But some species have pairings that mate for life. Given that until recently scientists have often overlooked homosexual acts in animals, disregarded them completely, or have not reported them, the number of species is probably much higher. The closest relatives of humans, the other great apes, gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos, and orangutans, have all been observed performing sexual acts between members of the same sex. We cannot disregard the theory that there may be a genetic predisposition in some members of species to be homosexual. But why? Evolution has created a behavior which does not seem logical or advantageous for the purpose of evolution, and yet it persists within the natural world. I ask again, why? Groups within our population cry out and say that homosexuals will destroy our concept of family if we allow them to get married. But what is family? Much like marriage, families have evolved too. Once upon a time, a family was an entire village, and slowly it evolved into a nuclear family. But these days, families are grandparents raising grandchildren, and couples with no children, and single parents raising children not of their own genes. Families are unmarried and married, with one child, or many, or none. And again, I say, let us look at what the rest of the natural world has to show us about this concept of family. Although few species have been extensively studied, there are some examples which highlight the importance of homosexuality in a family environment. And maybe these give insight as to why homosexuality evolved. Male swans that bond may steal an egg from a heterosexual couple, or mate with a female before driving her off after she has laid her eggs. The males then raise the baby together. We are told by lobbyists that 2 men or 2 women cannot possibly successfully raise a child together, and yet it is known that in this swan example, a homosexual pair will statistically be more successful than a heterosexual pair at raising their offspring to adulthood. In the animal kingdom, successfully raising is judged by the success of their offspring to then reproduce as well. There is no evidence to suggest that this is any less likely to occur in an individual raised by same-sex parents than in one raised by heterosexual parents. If we allow the argument that the emotional development of a human child will be stunted because of having 2 parents of the same sex, we must ask ourselves if we should also reconsider letting single parents raise children. After all, are they not also missing a role model of a particular sex from their lives? Many children of heterosexual couples experience physical and emotional abuse at the hands of their parents, and yet we are more judgmental on the idea of homosexual parents. What evidence do we have but the fears of some to suggest that same-sex couples will do any worse? Given the fight they must go through in order to have the children in the first place, must we also not consider the possibility that perhaps they will have more love and care for that child than a heterosexual couple with an accidental child? Science has now concluded the line of inquiry that suggests that homosexuality was a choice. We may not have conclusively shown what causes homosexuality in people, but we do know that there is a biological basis for it, much like there is for eye, skin, and hair color. Indeed, if there was not a genetic component to homosexuality, one would have to wonder why it is the heterosexuals that give birth to them. Homosexuals were persecuted by the Nazis as being unnatural, although this is little talked about. Are we persecuting them any less for being different to what humanity considers the norm? I dare not get into the argument of what is normal, or we shall be here forever, but it is a question we all need to ask ourselves. Look around and ask, are we all the same? So to reiterate, I have discussed that the idea of marriage has a long and convoluted history, where the purpose behind it has changed to match the whims of the controlling society or organization at any given point in history. I have also discussed that homosexuality is both common and normal. And so we come, as we inevitably must, to the question, why these two should not be joined. More and more people are choosing civil unions because the strict rules governing marriage within religious institutions are suffocating in today's world. Civil unions are the state's version of marriage, but you do not hear heterosexuals announcing they're getting civil unioned. It's married, regardless of who performs the ceremony. Civil unions are a civil right. Civil rights are for all people. As Prime Minister, you govern Australia. Not whites, not one state, not a majority. All people within Australia. Their sexuality, their skin colour, their occupation, none of these things matter because you are our representative. We entrusted you with our country to improve the state of Australia for all people, not for some. We entrusted our country to your safekeeping with the promise in return you would treat us all equally, that we were all entitled to the same civil rights. Allow marriage for same-sex couples. What reason do we really have not to?